I knew something was off the second my dad called me into the dining room with that stiff, controlled voice he only used when he was annoyed or when he was about to make sure I felt annoyed. I'm Richard, 27, and for most of my life I've tried to pretend that the tension in our house was just some strange family quirk, something other people wouldn't understand. You know how you convince yourself things are normal because the alternative feels too heavy to unpack? That was me for years. I thought if I kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed useful, I could dodge most of the emotional nonsense my parents liked to hurl around. But that night, the one where my dad looked me straight in the eyes and basically declared I was his life's biggest regret. Yeah, that was the moment any illusions I still had kind of evaporated. It's weird to describe, because on paper my family looks like a picture people would put on Christmas cards. My dad, Mark, is the type of man who walks into a room like he owns the air everyone breathes. He built a decent-sized construction business from scratch, and he never let us forget it. To him, every achievement was a trophy he earned by being tougher, smarter, and more disciplined than everyone else. And my mom, Linda, floated through life as his echo, soft voice, pretty smile, the type of person who could bake cookies for the neighborhood and then quietly pass judgment on everyone who took one. My brother, Kane, 3 years younger than me, was their crown jewel. They'd beam at him like sunlight bounced off his forehead. He could show up with failing grades, a broken window, and a story that didn't add up, and somehow it had become my fault for not being a better role model. I grew up being the designated, responsible one, the one who didn't stir trouble, the one who did chores without being asked, the one who apologized first, even when I was the one hurt. After a while, it didn't even occur to me that it was strange. When your entire childhood is shaped around maintaining peace, peace starts to look like the reward for swallowing everything toxic. You tell yourself, at least it's quiet. You tell yourself, at least no one's yelling. But man, you don't realize what that does to you until you're older, and suddenly you're in rooms with people who treat you with normal human decency, and your whole body reacts like it's a foreign language. That dinner started like any other. I showed up because it was my mom's birthday, and regardless of the emotional climate between us, I still believed showing up mattered. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe some naive part of me wanted to believe that things could be normal for a night. I drove over with a small, carefully wrapped gift in the passenger seat, a silver bracelet I'd saved for, because she'd mentioned liking something similar months ago. I thought, it was stupid, that maybe she'd appreciate the gesture. When I walked in, they were all already seated. Kane had his elbows on the table, scrolling through something on his phone. My dad sat straight back like he was waiting to conduct a business meeting. My mom looked tired in a way that didn't come from age, but from disappointment she hadn't even bothered to hide. I set the gift on the counter and took my seat. The table was quiet except for the clink of cutlery. "No, how are you, Richard?" "No, good to see you." Just the familiar sense that I had walked into their world uninvited. My dad cleared his throat. That sound used to make me tighten up like a reflex. It still does, honestly. He set down his fork, folded his hands, and fixed me with that stare, the one that tries to cut right through you. "We need to have a conversation," he said, which in our family translated to, "You've done something wrong, and whatever it is, we've already decided you're guilty." I took a quiet breath. "About what?" "You," he said simply, as if that was a perfectly reasonable category. My mom sighed like I'd already done something to ruin the evening. Kane snorted under his breath for reasons I still don't understand. Dad leaned back, studying me. "You've always been difficult." That word hung there, heavy. Difficult? I wasn't perfect, sure, but I'd done more for them than Kane ever had. I'd helped with their business books, driven Kane to practices, stayed home on weekends when they needed help, worked part-time through high school so they wouldn't have to worry about my expenses. Difficult? That stung. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, keeping my voice steady. He shook his head. "This." He gestured vaguely at me. "The attitude. The distance. The constant strain. It's been years of this, Richard. Years. I think we've earned the right to say it." Mom folded her napkin with a little too much focus. "We've tried so hard with you," she murmured, and for a second I almost laughed because the sentence was so bizarre. "Tried? With me?" Dad continued, his voice sharpening. "The truth is, you've been a burden since the day you were born." He said it calmly, like he was reviewing a spreadsheet, like it was a fact he'd waited too long to state out loud. My chest tightened. I felt heat rise to my face, not from embarrassment, but from the type of shock that freezes you for a second before your brain catches up. A burden. My entire existence distilled down to that one word. Mom lifted her eyes and added, "We should have focused on your brother. At least he appreciates us." I looked at Kane, who smirked like this was some show put on for his entertainment. "It's true," he said casually. "You've always been weird. Weird. Burden. Disappointment. Unwanted. Pick any word. They'd probably attach it to me if given enough time." For a moment, I felt 12 again. The same feeling of smallness, of not belonging in my own house. But then something inside me shifted, not in an explosive way, not like a dramatic movie moment. It was quieter, like a door closing softly from within. I pushed my chair back. The sound startled my mom, who blinked at me like she didn't expect me to have a reaction at all. I stood up slowly and adjusted my sleeves, mostly because my hands were shaking and I needed something to focus on. When I finally looked at them, I felt strangely calm. "You won't have to deal with me after tonight," I said. They froze, not out of guilt or concern. It was something else. Confusion mixed with annoyance, like I was interrupting a script they'd written. My dad scoffed. "Oh, stop being dramatic." Kane leaned back like he was watching a joke unfold. "Where are you even going to go?" My mom shook her head. "Richard, sit down. This isn't the time." But I didn't. I walked toward the door, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside into the cold night air. And here's the strange part. The moment the door closed behind me, I felt something I couldn't name at the time. It wasn't relief, not yet. It wasn't anger either. It was more like the first breath after being underwater too long. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and just stayed there for a minute. My hands rested on the steering wheel while my thoughts ran in circles. My parents' words echoed in my mind, each one landing harder the more I replayed it. A burden, a mistake, someone they should have never invested time in. And for the first time in my life, I realized something that would change everything that came after. I didn't have to keep proving my worth to people who had already decided I had none. But this story, it doesn't stop there. That night was only the spark. And like any spark, it didn't stay small for long. Things escalated in ways none of us expected, especially them. Because when you push someone long enough, you eventually reach a point where they don't break. They decide to push back. And the pushback? That's where everything really started. But the moment it all truly shifted, the moment the real conflict began, came 3 days later when my dad showed up at my apartment unannounced, with a demand that flipped everything upside down. I didn't sleep much the night after the dinner. It wasn't crying or anything dramatic like that. I've had years of emotional calluses built up, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying every little moment from childhood up to that night, as if my brain had decided to hold its own private marathon of greatest hits. The time my dad blamed me for Kane breaking his bedroom window. The time my mom canceled my birthday dinner because Kane wasn't in the mood to go out. The time I got accepted into a good college and they said, "That's nice, but how is Kane supposed to feel included if you leave?" Those little memories that you brush off when they happen, but later realize were tiny cracks forming in a wall that was going to collapse someday. And collapsing is exactly what it did. 3 days after that dinner, I woke up to relentless banging on my apartment door. Not knocking, banging. The kind that makes you sit upright because you think either the building is on fire or someone decided to use your door as percussion practice. I opened it, expecting maybe a neighbor yelling about parking or a package that wasn't mine. But no, it was my dad. He stood there in his work jacket, arms crossed, jaw set, and eyes burning like I had done something to him. He didn't even let me say a full sentence before pushing past me into the apartment like he owned the place. "Dad, what are you doing here?" He looked around, scrunching his nose at my living room like it offended his senses. "This is where you live? Good grief. Why are you here?" I repeated, more firmly. He turned sharply toward me. "We need to talk." Funny how in my family, "we need to talk" always meant, "I'm about to tell you something unfair and expect you to thank me for it." He paced the room once, then planted himself in front of me with that stance he used when he was about to lay down the law, a phrase he used far too often for someone with grown children. "Your brother needs a place to stay." I blinked. "Okay, and what does that have to do with me?" "He's moving in with you," my dad said flatly, like it was already decided. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. "Why would he move in here?" Dad lifted his chin. "Because he and Mia broke up. She kicked him out. He needs space. And your place is bigger than his old room at home." He's not moving in with me, I said immediately. Dad narrowed his eyes. Don't be selfish, Richard. Your brother is going through a hard time. Be grateful someone never tossed you out. I almost laughed. Be grateful someone never tossed me out? They practically did 3 nights ago. I kept my voice level. He's not living here. This isn't my responsibility. Oh, but you are a responsibility, he shot back. We've carried you your whole life. The least you can do is help your brother during a rough patch. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I wasn't sure which part baffled me more. The fact he genuinely believed they had carried me, or the fact he thought Kane deserved my help after smirking at me while I walked out of that awful dinner. Dad stepped closer, lowering his voice. You owe us. I let out a breath, slow and controlled. I owe you nothing. For a split second, I saw something crack in his expression. Not regret, just surprise that I dared talk back with anything other than the usual apologetic tone they'd trained into me. But it was gone quickly. Fine, he said coldly. If you're going to act like this, don't expect us to keep helping you financially. I almost laughed again. You don't help me financially. I pay for my own place, my own car, my own bills. Your insurance is under us, he snapped. Oh, there it was. The real weapon. The one string they had left tied to my life. I smiled. Not a happy smile, but one of those tight, exhausted ones. I'll switch it on Monday. His face fell for a second, like he didn't expect me to call his bluff. You're being ridiculous, he said, voice rising. Family helps family. You mean I help Kane? I corrected. You've never asked him to help me. Not once. Dad took a breath through his nose, the way he did when he was angry but wanted to pretend he wasn't. Your mother is worried sick about you. No, she's worried I embarrassed her by walking out. That one landed. He scoffed, shook his head, and marched toward the door. You'll regret this, he muttered before slamming it behind him. I stood alone in my living room, pulse pounding, but weirdly enough, I felt lighter. It was the first time I had pushed back and not folded in on myself afterward. But the universe wasn't done testing me yet. Later that evening, my phone lit up with 3 missed calls from my mom, then one from Kane, which I ignored because the last thing I needed was him calling to whine or guilt trip me. But then I got a text from my mom that made something in my stomach twist. Richard, you need to call us. Kane told us everything. Everything. Everything what? Against my better judgment, I called her. She picked up immediately, her voice trembling in that fragile way she used when she wanted me to feel like the villain. Why would you kick your brother out? Why would you be so cruel when he's hurting? I rubbed my forehead. Mom, he never lived here. Don't lie, she whispered. I'm not lying. Dad came here demanding I let him move in. I said no. There was a pause. A very long, icy pause. Then she said, your father wouldn't lie to me. I had to close my eyes. Then he didn't tell you the truth. You know, she said quietly, this is exactly why we've always had issues with you. You twist things. You make drama. You don't think of anyone but yourself. A familiar weight settled in my chest. The old guilt. The old script. The old manipulation. Except this time something felt different. Like the script didn't fit me anymore. I'm not doing this, I said. She inhaled sharply. Doing what? This guilt stuff. This blaming. This rewriting reality. I'm done with it. Richard. I'm done, I repeated. I hung up. That should have been the breaking point, honestly. But the universe had spectacular timing. 2 days later, the real betrayal happened. It was Saturday morning. I had just sat down with coffee when I heard buzzing, my phone, blowing up with notifications. But not texts, not calls, bank alerts, multiple. At first I thought it was fraud, some scammer hacking my card. But then I saw the one message that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Transfer completed. $8,400 to MK Holdings. I stared at the name. MK Holdings. Dad's business. Why was my money going there? Then the next alert came in. Transfer completed. $3,200 to Kane Walker. And another. Transfer completed. $1,000 to Kane Walker. My stomach dropped. No. No. I logged into my banking app so fast I nearly dropped the phone. My savings account was nearly empty. Everything I'd been building. Everything I'd worked for. Gone. My heart pounded in my ears as I went through the transactions. The pattern was unmistakable. Transfers. Automatic withdrawals. All processed through an old joint account I'd forgotten existed. The one my parents opened for me when I was a teenager. The one Mom insisted we keep connected for emergencies. They still had access to it. And they'd taken almost everything. Kane. My parents. All of them. My phone rang then. Kane. I answered, voice shaking. Where is my money? His voice was casual, almost bored. Relax. Dad said you weren't using it properly. It's going to good use. Good use. $8,000 to Dad's company. $4,000 to Kane. My vision blurred for a second, not from tears, but from sheer disbelief. You stole from me. He laughed. It's not stealing if it's family. Dad said it's basically a contribution. And since you wouldn't help me move in, this makes things fair. 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 I sat completely still, letting the moment sink into my bones. That was it. That was the breaking point. The exact second something inside me finally snapped cleanly, quietly, like a rope that had been fraying for decades and finally gave out. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't even respond. I just hung up. And in the silence of my apartment, surrounded by the echoes of everything they had just taken from me, something new took shape inside me. Something sharp, focused, ice cold. The first few hours after discovering my accounts had been emptied felt unreal, like my body was moving but my mind was 3 steps behind, still trying to make sense of the numbers on the screen. I remember sitting on the floor of my living room with my back against the couch, staring at my phone as if the balance would change if I refreshed it enough times. It didn't. It just kept flashing the same harsh reality at me. Almost everything I had saved over the last several years was gone. It wasn't even the money itself that broke me. It was the message behind it. My own family had decided they had a right to take from me because I didn't obey. They felt entitled to my work, my savings, my future. And the way Kane said, relax, like I was making a big deal out of nothing, stuck with me like a splinter under the skin. For a long time, I didn't move. My coffee went cold. The sun shifted across the wall. My apartment grew darker, and I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just sat there, letting the quiet wrap around me while the shock sank deeper and deeper until it finally hit something raw inside me. Rock bottom isn't a dramatic fall. It's this dull, heavy awareness that things you believed, like love, loyalty, fairness, might not have been real where you came from. It's realizing the people you grew up with never really saw you as a person, just a resource, a tool, a placeholder. And that thought, it hit harder than the missing money. For the next few days, I moved on autopilot. I went to work, but I barely spoke. I ate because I knew I had to, not because I was actually hungry. My coworker and friend, Tyler, asked if I was okay on Monday. And for once I didn't just say, yeah, all good. Instead, I shrugged and said, just a rough weekend. He looked at me for a second longer than usual, like he knew there was more, but he didn't push. I was grateful for that. But even while I felt like I was drowning inside, a weird thing started happening in the cracks of the chaos. It started small, barely noticeable at first, but it was there. I started thinking about my life without my parents in it. Not in a bitter way. More like, what would it look like to finally make choices that didn't revolve around avoiding their disappointment or earning their approval? What would it look like to focus on me, something I'd never truly done? The thought scared me, but it also sparked something I hadn't felt before. Possibility. On Tuesday, I went to the bank in person. Walking through those glass doors felt like walking into a dentist's office as a kid, tense and unsure, but trying to act calm. The banker pulled up my history, went through everything, and confirmed that the withdrawals were made using the joint account link. I didn't authorize any of those, I said quietly. You're listed as a joint owner, she replied. The other owners have the same access you do, so they can take whatever they want. She hesitated. Legally, yes. I closed my eyes for a moment. How do I remove them? Fill out these forms. Once processed, the link will be permanently severed. It took 10 minutes to fill the papers out. 10 minutes to undo something that had been tied around my life since I was a teenager. And when I handed the forms back, the banker smiled gently. Once everything updates, you'll be in full control. Full control. I hadn't realized how foreign that idea felt until she said it out loud. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up my work schedule. I'd been grinding quietly at my job for years, helping manage logistics for a mid-sized distribution company. I was good at it, really good, and I'd always taken on extra tasks without being asked. Organization calmed me. Efficiency made sense in ways people never had. But because I was so used to minimizing myself at home, I'd also minimize myself at work. That night, I looked at all the projects I'd contributed to, the improvements I'd made, the messes I'd cleaned up that no one else wanted to deal with. And I realized something. I had been undervaluing myself everywhere, not just at home. So I emailed my boss. Not a dramatic email, not a request for anything yet. Just a simple question. Can we schedule a meeting sometime this week or next? I'd like to discuss my role and responsibilities. It was the first step, a tiny one, but it felt huge to me. The next few days were quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. My parents hadn't called me. Kane was radio silent too, which honestly worked in my favor. It gave me space to breathe without being pulled back into their web. During that time, I started doing things I had always put off. I went grocery shopping properly, not just buying bare essentials. I cooked instead of microwaving whatever was fast. I cleaned my entire apartment, not because I felt obligated, but because it actually made me feel better. Then on Wednesday, I did something that surprised even me. I found a therapist. I had browsed dozens of profiles before, but always chickened out. This time I filled out the form, scheduled an appointment, and showed up. Sitting across from a stranger, telling her how my family took my savings, how they always treated me like an inconvenience, how my brother got whatever he wanted while I was expected to give without limits. It felt like peeling off armor I didn't realize I'd grown used to wearing. She listened without judgment. And once I finished talking, she said something simple but powerful. You've survived years of emotional neglect by learning not to need anything. But now you're allowed to build a life where your needs matter. I didn't cry, but I felt something soften inside me just a little. The next week, my boss responded to my meeting request. She scheduled it for Friday morning. I prepped all Thursday night. Every documented change I'd made at work, every process I'd improved, every metric that had risen because of something I introduced. I wasn't going to walk in there and hope for recognition. I was going to demonstrate my value. The meeting went better than I expected. My boss listened, nodded, flipped through my notes, and was impressively transparent. Honestly, I didn't realize how much you had taken on. You've been quietly holding this department together. She paused. Let me see what I can do about getting you a raise. And maybe even a shift into a higher position. For the first time in a while, I walked out of a room feeling taller than I did walking in. But growth wasn't just happening at work. My personal life started shifting too, in subtle ways. Tyler invited me to hang out after work one day. A simple invitation for dinner and a movie with a few people from the office. Normally, I would have said no. My default answer to social plans had always been, I'm good, but thanks. Saying yes felt like learning to use a new muscle. The evening was easy, light, relaxing. No one expected anything from me. No one judged me for small things. No one demanded explanations. Being surrounded by people who treated me like an equal, not a burden, it was a strange sort of healing. Slowly, I started seeing the distance between how I'd been treated my whole life and how people outside my family treated me. It was like comparing two different worlds. One made me shrink. The other made me feel like breathing fully for the first time. And with every passing day, I felt myself rising bit by bit out of the hole my parents dug for me. But the fall wasn't over yet. Not completely. Because one Thursday evening, as I got home from work feeling almost proud of myself, I found something taped to my apartment door. An envelope. My name written on the front in my father's handwriting. Inside was a letter, thin, impersonal, typed on his company's stationery. As I unfolded it and read the first line, my chest tightened. Richard, we need to talk about what you owe the family. I read the next line, then the next, and by the time I reached the end, my blood ran cold. What they wanted, what they demanded, was something so outrageous that even after everything they'd already done, I still couldn't believe they had the audacity to put it in writing. And that letter? That was the moment I realized the rise I'd been working on wasn't just for me. After walking away from my parents and everything tied to them, I spent nearly a year just figuring out how to survive. Then another year building. But year 3? That was the year of patience. I didn't want to lash out while I was still emotionally tangled in their words. I didn't want some dramatic blowout that would make me look unstable or bitter. I wanted precision, strategy, a way to make them feel every single moment they made me feel invisible, replaceable, and disposable. It started on a random Tuesday. I was sitting in the back room of my cafe-turned-catering business, sipping an espresso and going over payroll when I got a call from an unfamiliar number. Normally I'd ignore it, but something made me swipe. On the other end was a panicked voice. Hi. Is this Richard Preston? Speaking, I said, cautious. This is Susan. I'm with Hartwell Community Development. You were listed as a reference for Michael Preston on his grant application. The name hit me like a slap. Michael, my golden child brother. The one they all adored. The one they practically disowned me in favor of. The last time I'd heard his name, he was being offered a position at some innovative startup, which, from what I could gather, was mostly drinking IPAs in a WeWork space and posting on LinkedIn. What kind of grant? I asked, pretending not to know. It's a small business redevelopment fund, she explained. He's proposing a community kitchen/cafe model. We're in early review, but need to verify a few things. You were listed as a former business partner. I nearly laughed. Business partner? He had never even seen the inside of my cafe. Not once. But suddenly, I was his reference. Susan sensed the pause and quickly added, he said you two collaborated on a few small-scale catering events under his brand, but that your company managed logistics. Uh-huh, I said, scribbling the name of the fund and her office number on the corner of a receipt. Can you send me the application he submitted? I can't share full documents without his permission, but I'll email you the public summary. Are you confirming the reference? Or, I'll need to check some records first, I said smoothly. Can I get back to you by the end of the day? As soon as I hung up, I stared at the espresso in my hand, suddenly bitter. That smug snake was trying to use my business to get funding? He must have figured I disappeared quietly, probably assumed I was still working in someone else's kitchen. But no, he was reaching into my world now. And that meant the game was back on. I called Susan back an hour later and politely told her I had no knowledge of any partnership with Michael, that we hadn't worked together in years. I didn't overdo it. No drama. Just facts. That's the thing about planting seeds. You don't scream about it. You just water them and let time do the rest. After that call, I went home and opened the shoebox I'd been avoiding for years. Inside were old letters, report cards, family photos, a USB drive, and a folder of estate documents. Most of it was meaningless, but the USB was different. It had a collection of financial spreadsheets I'd made during college when I managed Dad's property finances as a side hustle for extra cash. He never paid me, of course. It was always good experience or family duty. But I kept everything. The spreadsheets listed every tenant in his buildings, every dollar that came in and went out, maintenance costs, eviction notices, even side deals he'd tried to hide from Mom. And tucked between them, a document titled Preston Holdings Equity Distribution Draft. I clicked. The document was a scan of a proposed inheritance plan. It wasn't legally binding, just a draft. But it confirmed what I'd always suspected. Everything was going to Michael. I wasn't even listed. I leaned back in my chair, letting the old feelings wash over me. Rage. Hurt. That familiar ache of being passed over. But now, I didn't feel small anymore. I felt something else. Leverage. Over the next few weeks, I began gathering information. Not just on my parents and brother, but on everything tied to the Preston name. I dug into property records, tax filings, business registrations. I found 3 buildings still under my dad's name, 1 LLC owned by Mom, and a suspicious youth entrepreneurship nonprofit that Michael had apparently co-founded. The nonprofit's listed address? One of my dad's rental units. I visited that address on a rainy Thursday evening and found it completely empty. Just a dusty desk, a few scattered pamphlets, and a locked filing cabinet. It was a shell, probably created to secure grants and tax write-offs. I took photos, recorded a short video, and left. The next phase of my plan involved people. Specifically, people they wouldn't expect me to know. I started with Janice, Dad's old accountant. She used to oversee his rental income until he fired her during a paranoid phase, convinced she was overcharging him. She now worked part-time at a retirement firm and seemed genuinely happy to hear from me. "Oh, honey, I always wondered what happened to you," she said when I called. "Your dad was such a piece of work. You were the only polite one in that house." I didn't badmouth anyone. I just asked a few casual questions about old tax filings, about how LLC transfers worked, about what would happen if someone, hypothetically, was listed as a silent partner without knowing it. She offered to review a few documents for me, off the record. "Just bring coffee," she added with a chuckle. "From your cafe. I hear it's better than Starbucks." Next, I reached out to Natalie, my cousin on Mom's side. We hadn't spoken in years. She was the weird one in the family, always into activism and social justice, which my parents hated. But she was now working in nonprofit grant auditing. Bingo. I invited her to brunch under the guise of catching up. By the second mimosa, I'd mentioned Michael's little shell nonprofit. She didn't bite at first, but once I showed her the photos, her expression changed. "Richard, this is shady," she muttered, scrolling through them. "If he's using this to secure public funds, that's straight-up fraud." I shrugged. I just found it odd. Didn't know if it was worth pursuing. "Send me the address," she said, sliding her phone out. "I'll run it through our network." Quietly, each step I took was small, calculated. I wasn't kicking down the door, I was studying the hinges. And then came the wedding invitation. A thick, cream-colored envelope landed in my mailbox one afternoon. Gold foil lettering. Embossed names. Michael and his fiancée, Carly. The wedding was set for late August at a vineyard upstate. Formal attire. Family-only rehearsal dinner. Limited seating. The invitation wasn't a peace offering. It was a statement. A flex. I was being invited not as a brother, but as a witness. As a prop. I turned it over in my hands, considering my options. I could RSVP no and disappear again. Or, I could use it. Weddings, after all, bring everyone together. Even the ones who pretend you don't exist. I texted Natalie that night. "Still want to visit that vineyard next month?" She replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a flame gif. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I played it cool. I sent a polite RSVP. Bought a suit. Even messaged Carly on Instagram to congratulate her. She was sweet, if a bit clueless. She had no idea what kind of family she was marrying into. Meanwhile, Natalie dug up more dirt. Michael had applied for 3 separate grants using the same nonprofit. 2 were pending. 1 had been quietly approved. The money hadn't disbursed yet, but it would soon. And then came the final piece of the setup, an email. Using a burner account, I drafted a short, anonymous tip to the state Small Business Compliance Office. I attached the photos from the fake nonprofit address, included Michael's full name, the organization's EIN, and suggested they look into the property records. I hit send, and then I waited. The morning of Michael's wedding felt strangely peaceful. Not excited, not anxious, just calm. The kind of calm that settles over you when you've already fought the battles inside your own head and come out the other side knowing exactly who you are and exactly what you're willing to do to protect the life you rebuilt. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror adjusting my tie, noticing the person staring back at me wasn't the same man who sat frozen on his living room floor years ago after seeing his bank account drained. My posture was different. My expression was different. My entire energy was different. It wasn't pride. I wasn't there yet. But there was a distinct sense of steadiness, like my feet were planted in soil that finally belonged to me. The vineyard was stunning. Rolling hills, old oak trees, a sunlit courtyard paved with smooth stone. Expensive. The kind of place my parents loved because it impressed people. Guests mingled outside while soft music drifted through the air. I spotted my parents near the back patio, my mother smiling tightly, my father scanning the crowd like he expected applause for existing. Michael stood near the groomsmen, grinning as if he were the star of some TV drama. None of them noticed me at first. I watched them from a distance, and there was something oddly liberating about seeing them without feeling the old pull in my chest. They were just people now. Flawed. Predictable. Transparent. Nothing more. The ceremony went smoothly. Beautiful, emotional, perfectly curated. Carly looked radiant. Michael looked polished. They exchanged vows under an arch draped with flowers. People clapped and dabbed tears. I clapped too, silently, politely. I didn't hate them. I didn't need to. Hate ties you to people. I had already untied myself long ago. But the reception, that was the part one came for. The dinner hall was elegant and warm, decorated with candles, crystal glassware, and long wooden tables lined with white roses. When the toasts began, I noticed my father straighten his tie, preparing for his spotlight moment. He loved speaking at events. He loved being heard, being admired. He stood up, holding the microphone like a man about to deliver wisdom that would change lives. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'd like to say a few words about my son, Michael." I watched the room soften as he praised my brother's perseverance, ambition, leadership. It was a masterpiece of inflated stories, selective memory, and dramatic pauses. My mother nodded in agreement, eyes shining proudly. Michael sat there soaking in every word like someone being crowned. Then, midway through the speech, the double doors of the reception hall opened. A man and woman in formal attire walked in with clipboards and ID badges. Quiet, unassuming, but authoritative in a way that shifted the energy in the room immediately. They approached the coordinator first, spoke briefly, then moved toward the families. My father paused, confused, microphone still raised. "Can I help you?" he asked, annoyed. The woman spoke calmly. "Are you Mr. Mark Preston?" He stiffened. "Yes. We're with the state Small Business Compliance Office. We need to speak with you and your wife regarding a matter involving Preston Holdings and the Preston Youth Initiative." The room fell silent. My mother's face drained of color. Michael looked from them to the officials, trying to decipher what was happening. My father, attempting to maintain control, replied, "This is my son's wedding. Whatever this is, it can wait." "I'm afraid it cannot," the man said politely. "We need to discuss several discrepancies related to misrepresented nonprofit activity and grant applications. We were also informed that certain business funds may have been moved through personal accounts." There it was. The first domino. Gasps rippled through the tables. Murmurs started quietly. My father sputtered, This must be some mistake. Those accusations are false." The woman nodded. "We'll need both you and your wife to come with us for initial questioning. We've already secured preliminary documents through a warrant." A warrant? At a wedding? Even I wasn't expecting it to go this dramatically, but fate has a sense of humor. My father's face went a shade I'd never seen. My mother clutched her purse like it might save her. And Michael stood up abruptly. "Wait, what does this have to do with me?" The agent turned. "Are you Michael Preston?" "Yes," he said, voice cracking. "We'll need to discuss the grant you recently received through the Preston Youth Initiative, as well as 2 additional grants currently under review." Michael blinked rapidly. This is my dad's nonprofit." The man shook his head. "Records list you as co-founder and managing partner." My parents whipped their heads toward him. "You what?" My mother whispered in horror. Michael stammered. "Dad told me to sign the papers. He said it was all above board." There it was. The cracks. Years of hidden dealings, small lies, manipulated documents, and entitlement were finally surfacing. The room watched as the perfect Preston family image unraveled in real time. My father snapped. "Richard, do you know anything about?" I met his gaze calmly. "No," I said. "I don't know anything about your activities." He flinched. Not because of what I said, but because of how I said it. Calm, detached, and completely unburdened by him. It was the first time in my life he realized he had no power over me. Security quietly approached. The agents led my parents out first, then Michael. Carly stood frozen, bouquet trembling in her hands. Her father stormed over to her, whispering an urgent string of questions. Guests whispered. Cameras recorded. People turned away, embarrassed for them. And there I sat, watching, steady, silent, not triumphant, just done. After they were escorted outside, the coordinator took the microphone and, her voice shaking, announced a brief intermission. Most guests spilled out into the courtyard, buzzing with speculation. I stayed inside, letting the quiet settle. A moment later, Carly approached me. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. There was something stronger in her expression. Hurt, yes, but also clarity. "Did you know something like this was going to happen today?" she asked. I shook my head. I didn't know it would happen today, only that it would happen eventually. She looked down at her ring, twisting it slowly. I kept wondering why Michael refused to show me the nonprofit's paperwork. Why he kept pushing off questions. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. "You weren't paranoid," I said softly. She nodded once, then stepped back. "Thank you for being honest." I didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to add. An hour later, word spread that the reception was officially canceled. The newlyweds were not returning. Guests slowly began leaving, some upset, others fascinated, others calling family members all ready to retell the drama. I walked out to the parking lot, the sun beginning to dip behind the hills. The evening breeze carried the faint scent of grapes and dust. It felt strangely poetic, something ending, something starting, all in the same hour. As I opened my car door, I saw Natalie leaning against her vehicle across the lot, arms crossed, grinning. "Subtle," she said, laughing softly. "Very subtle. I didn't plan for it to blow up like that," I admitted. "Maybe not," she replied. But they built their entire lives on pretending consequences didn't exist. They were going to get exposed sooner or later. We talked for a few minutes, then hugged before parting ways. Driving home, I didn't feel giddy or victorious. I wasn't celebrating. It wasn't about watching them crash. It was about finally being free from the weight of them. Free from their voices, their manipulation, their constant attempts to control me. Weeks passed. Investigations opened. Grants frozen. Properties audited. My parents' rental business faced civil penalties for misfiled taxes. Michael's fraudulent nonprofit was dissolved. Carly filed for annulment 3 months later. My family tried calling me many times during the fallout, but I never picked up. Not out of spite, because I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not even closure. Meanwhile, my own life kept rising. My business expanded. I hired more staff. I finally felt present when I woke up in the mornings, not bracing for someone else's expectations, but building a life I actually lived in. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't waiting for their apology anymore. I didn't need it. I didn't need them. That was the real revenge. Not the downfall. Not the exposure. Freedom. The kind they never thought I deserved. And the final moment that sealed everything came unexpectedly, 6 months after the wedding, when my therapist asked, "What would you say if your father walked into this room right now?" I thought about it for a long moment. Then I smiled, small and genuine. "Nothing," I said. I just walked past him. Because I didn't need to be seen by the people who never looked at me. My life had already moved on, and the door behind me had already closed. For good.